Hello, I'm Dennis Morganson, the agent for horticulture education here in Washington County. Today on our Facebook Live video, we're going to transplant some orchids. These are Phalaenopsis orchids, which are probably the easiest orchids for most of us to grow indoors here. They are native to Southeast Asia, India, China, Australia, those areas. Some of these they're either epiphytic or lithophytic. Epiphytic, only thing that means is these plants grow on other plants. They don't cause any damage to the plant. A lot of these will grow on tree branches or in organic matter from other plants, things like that. The lithophytic ones will grow on rocks. They're not parasitic at all, but they just kind of live on the bark and the other plants. So these ones here, this larger one here is on its third bloom cycle. These other two smaller ones are on their second. I've had them only about 2 years. And then this little one here is a friend of mine's little sick plant. We're going to transplant it and then talk about some of these others while we do that. One note on these like bright indirect light, so you don't want to put them in the direct sun because where they grow again, they're in tree branches and places where it's shady. It does have a dry season there, but these can take pretty dry, and you think about them, they have really thick fleshy leaves that they store some water in, and they have these really thick aerial roots that come out. These roots actually will absorb moisture out of the air. So where they're native to, it's very moist and humid. So, and if you touch them, some of the little fibers on that comes off. But if you were to cut this root, the actual root is inside of there. This little membrane covers that root so it can help it absorb some water. Now some people don't like the looks of these with these aerial roots coming out, but you don't want to cut those off. The plant actually needs that, and that's the way the plant grows. So you can imagine if this is not in a pot but growing on a branch, that these roots are going to come out and they're going to grab some of that organic matter and start to grow into those areas. So we'll go ahead and get started. Ideally, you would not transplant these while they're in bloom for a couple reasons. Main one, you don't want to upset the plant too much while you're trying to get these nice flowers. And these bloom for about 6 months, and then they'll take a 6-month rest, and you can just go through the cycle that way. This is an old bloom stalk. Sometimes you can leave these old stalks on after they stop, and they'll kind of grow another shoot out the side and give you a few more flowers. But the best thing to do when it starts to turn brown is you just take some clippers and just cut that back down as low as you can get it to the main branch and get rid of that. And if you'll look here, you'll see some of these older roots here that are starting to kind of decay. You can pull some of that out. I'm going to go ahead and transplant this one even though it's blooming, and then I'm going to transplant the smaller one. Main reason is because I want to put the smaller one in the pot that this one's coming in. These are still in the pot that they came from the store in, or the nursery. So if you notice, it's really weird when you pull these out because they're just growing in a little plastic pot, and then you just pull a little plastic pot off, and really there's just some bark in there. There's really not a lot in there that they grow on. So you can imagine they grow in an area. They're just hanging onto the side of a tree on the tree bark, so they don't need a lot. So what I will also give you a little bit of advice. They come with these little sticks in them that holds the flower upright. Keep those. Even after it's flowering, make sure you keep those because they have these little clips that you can keep those flowers upright. If you don't, the flowers will tend to lay over, and most of us want them to be upright. So just clean some of that stuff out of there, and then you notice it's almost purely just bark in this particular plant. So this is an orchid pot, and you notice it has some little holes in the sides. That's for water and air exchange. You will want to make sure you set this into a saucer, and you want to make sure this gets fully wet and just lets it run through the bark. So you can see these roots down in here are pretty nice white roots. They're the ones you want to keep. Make sure you take care of. So as far as transplanting them, you transplant them just like you would any other plant. You can use some Solus mix or mix your own up, but I like to buy the pre-mixed media for orchids. It's not that expensive, and you only transplant these about once every 3 or 4 years, so it's not like you really have to do a lot of work with these. They don't need any nutrients. I usually fertilize these twice a year with half-strength water-soluble fertilizer, so maybe one time in March or April, and again sometimes June, July, and then you don't have to fertilize them ever again. They don't like a lot of fertilizer because they come from areas where they're just living on organic matter. So we're going to put some soil in here, or it's basically just bark with a little bit of soil. But if you look, all this decomposed down in here. So I'm going to pull some of the roots that are kind of decomposing there too, and make sure that when I transplant this, I've got soil or bark that's going to fit up under that area where that was vacant. One thing about when you transplant these, you don't want to transplant them deeper than they were already growing. So I'm going to pull some of this media, bark, whatever you want to call it, back around the plant. It's very easy. Transplant these. Just make sure if you do transplant while you have a bloom stalk there that you're careful, because it takes, if you break that off, you're going to be waiting at least another 6 months before you'll get a new one on there. And they do stay in flower a long time if you've ever grown these. So just make sure I get some good contact with the root system here. Press it down. Now, these plants like to stay kind of pot bound or tightly in their area. Again, it's where they grow. It's how they grow. So you don't need to transplant too often. That's why I'm not putting this smaller plant, I'm not bumping it up into a larger pot, because I just don't want to get it too much too quick, because they just don't need that. So basically, that's pretty much all we need to do. I will straighten up, if I can get this to stand up. You see how that flower stalk wants to lay down? Go ahead and push this in and pull that stalk up and clip it to it. So just make sure you keep your little clips every year, and you can redo your orchid that way. So you can see, I think it looks better in the clay pot. I kind of prefer the clay pot. But now I'm going to go ahead and transplant this one. This is the container that one was growing in. You can see they even have a little bump up here to make sure the water drains out of that. Another thing is, you'll notice when you buy these Phalaenopsis orchids, sometimes they call them ice orchids, because they'll recommend you put an ice cube in there and let it melt once a week. I don't really like doing that. They don't like cold. They're from hot climates. So I just moist this whole area once a week and let the water drain out of it, and then that's it. Once a week is good enough indoors. And these don't really do well here outdoors, so they stay in my window in my office year-round. You can notice another thing about these: when you buy them, they'll put them in the more decorative pot. This one doesn't have a hole in it. So if you do go buy these, make sure that you buy ones that's got a hole in it, or you're going to have to put a hole in it, because if you water too much, it's going to set in water and then it's going to rot, and your plant's going to die. Now this smaller one here, this has been through, it's got some stalks on it, the old bloom stalks. We're going to take those out just because it's time for them to go. They're obviously not going to bloom again. The clips are a little different on this one too. Can make it a little harder, but we can still reuse them. They're just little plastic instead of the little, these look like little hair clips. I like those better. But these other ones work just as well. We're going to take those off, and then we're going to clip those bloom stalks out. So this plant is it's in dire shape. These larger ones were grown in the media or the bark that you would want. This one was growing in just peat. And you can see that's not its favorite thing. It stays wet. It's not the best thing. There's even a little bit of mold coming on that, because it's just not an ideal media for them. So with this one, it's not in bloom, so I'm not going to worry too much about upsetting it. I'm going to get rid of a lot of that moss that's packed in there, because again, that's not its favorite media. These don't grow in soil much, so they don't need that. So this is decomposed down. So I'm going to clip some of those old roots off of there that are bent. So it's going to look rough, but we've got to get rid of that, or we can get into good contact with some good bark and soil mix here. So get some more of that off of there. So we've got that broken down pretty good. Anything that's molded or anything that's kind of past its prime, we're going to get rid of that. And then we're going to cut those bloom stalks back as close to the stalk as we can get. So here's our little orchid. We're going to go ahead and pot it up into the old pot the other one came out of. And I'm not going to use that. We'll get some fresh. A little bit. Again, you don't want to put them deeper than they were, so you want to put them at the same height they were already growing. They're going to pull some new roots up out of here anyway. Press it down a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and stick the, might not look the greatest, but I'm going to go ahead and stick these sticks back in there. That way I'll have them handy whenever this plant grows and starts to bloom again. You can see that. He surely would be a lot happier in that than that nasty peat that it was growing in. I'm just going to set it back in that pot for now, and then that one's ready to go. These other two need transplanting, but I'm going to wait on those until they're finished their bloom cycle. There's a few things there that needs clipping out of some of these just to make them look a little bit better. But they're perfectly happy right now to stay where they are. I'll keep them watered until they finish blooming. Again, they'll be blooming probably through July at this point. If anybody has any questions about growing orchids, I will plug one of my classes now. The Wheelbarrow series is going on right now for gardeners, and the actual class on easy orchids is June the 18th here at the Washington County Extension Office. Also, there are about, let's see, we've just finished heirloom tomatoes. Next week we're doing asparagus. There's hybrid tea roses coming up, lilacs, lots of other things. If you would like to have a copy of this to see if there's any classes you'd like to attend, you can go on our Facebook page. I think that's still on there. You can call the office here at 859-336-7741, and we can mail you one of these or just stop in and pick one up. If anybody has any questions, give me a call. Thanks.